When I stepped into the bathroom, something small on the carpet caught my attention. It was a tiny glimmer, just a flicker of sunlight slipping through the blinds. Instinctively, I looked down, careful not to step on anything with my bare feet. Emily hadn't mentioned dropping anything here, but you never know, right? What I saw almost blended into the carpet, just a small foil circle. It looked like the backing from a pill strip, the kind left behind when a pill is popped out. I crouched down to pick it up, turning it over in my hand. There were markings on it, too, probably meaning Tuesday. Considering today was Wednesday, this was clearly yesterday's pill. Now, here's the thing, I don't take any medications. I'm a healthy 35-year-old guy, as is my wife Emily. We both just passed our physicals with flying colors, so why would there be a pill backing in our bathroom? A few possibilities popped into my head, but the one that stood out was the birth control pill. That made me pause. I had a vasectomy 2 years ago, after our second child was born, so I naturally assumed she wasn't on the pill anymore. She's never complained about periods or cramps, lucky her, so why would she need them now? At first, I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe it was something else, maybe even a health issue. But we both got clean bills of health just recently, so that didn't really make sense either. If the foil was here, the pills had to be close by. I locked the door and started searching the bathroom, feeling a sense of dread creeping in. After a few minutes, I found them. They were hidden in a box of tampons, stuffed underneath some aspirin. It was the same birth control pill pack she used to take before my surgery, back when we weren't trying for kids. Why on earth was she back on them? There was only one reason that made any sense, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. She had to be sleeping with someone else, someone who could get her pregnant. Emily had been cheating on me. We'd been together for 9 years, met back when I had just finished university. I was training to become an engineer, and she was working as an assistant. We met at a bar, and though sparks didn't exactly fly right away, she agreed to go out with me for dinner. Emily, almost as tall as me at 5 feet 10 inches, had been an athlete in her youth, so she had this slender, toned frame. She wasn't very busty, but her best feature, hands down, was her ass. Honestly, it's incredible. We dated for about a year before tying the knot when I was 26. We have 2 kids now, a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. After the second, I went ahead with the vasectomy to make sure we wouldn't have any more. Anyone on the outside, we looked like the perfect family. But now, looking at that pill pack, everything seemed fake. Emily went back to work after both kids, despite the crazy cost of childcare. I started an engineering firm with a couple of buddies, and while we weren't swimming in money, I enjoyed what I did. After finding that pill backing, I carefully put it back where I found it and decided not to confront her immediately. I needed to think, to plan. Going at her without proof wouldn't get me anywhere. I had to figure out the full story first. Who was this other guy? How long had it been going on? Was it someone from her office? Could it even be her boss? Worst of all, I started wondering about our kids. Were they even mine, despite the whirlwind of emotions I was going through? Anger, betrayal, confusion. I knew I had to stay calm and gather evidence. So, I did what anyone might do in this situation. I turned to the internet. I ordered DNA testing kits so I could discreetly check if the kids were really mine. I also bought surveillance equipment, tiny voice recorders for her car and purse, and some small cameras for the house. I doubted she'd bring someone here, but I wanted to be sure. I even found a way to clone her phone, so I could monitor her messages, emails, and calls without her knowing. Of course, that meant buying another phone, which took a few days to arrive. In the meantime, I kept a close eye on Emily. She didn't act any differently. Our sex life was the same, nothing out of the ordinary, just once or twice a week, usually on weekends. She didn't rush off to take a shower when she came home, nothing like that. It made me wonder if she was cheating at all, or if she was just that good at hiding it. Maybe she'd been doing it so long, it had become second nature. By Friday, all the equipment I'd ordered showed up at my office. I got the DNA kits, the recorders, the cameras, the new phone, and the cloning device. With everything ready, I left work early. When I got home, our au pair was feeding the kids dinner. I took my time setting up the cameras, one in the bathroom, one in the living room, and one in our bedroom with a perfect view of the bed. That night, after putting the kids to bed, I swabbed their mouths and mine for the DNA tests, then sent the samples off. Emily came home at the usual time, and we went through our evening routine like any other day, talking, but not really listening. After dinner, while she showered, I slipped the voice recorders into her car and purse and cloned her phone. Then, I sat down and went through her messages and emails, hoping to find some clue. But there was nothing. No secret conversations, no incriminating texts. Either she was incredibly careful, or maybe I was wrong. I wasn't sure what to believe anymore. The weekend came and went like any other. We spent time together as a family, had our usual intimacy in the mornings before the kids woke up, and by Monday, I still had no real answers. The pill strip had missing pills, and that gnawing feeling in my gut told me something was off. That Monday, I told her I'd be working from home, which gave me the chance to retrieve the footage from the cameras. It was time to start watching and see what I could find. The bathroom footage confirmed what I had feared: Emily was taking the pills. But the real shock came from the bedroom camera. On Saturday evening, while I was in the kitchen making dinner, she slipped into our bedroom to take a shower. While in there, she pulled out a second phone, one that wasn't in her usual bag. She was texting someone, hiding the phone in the ventilation duct afterward. When I checked the vent later, it was empty. Clearly, she takes it with her when she leaves. I needed to get my hands on that phone. This was the first real proof of her suspicious behavior. The next morning's footage showed her retrieving the phone from the vent and stashing it in her bag before heading off to work. That night, after she showered again, her bag was mysteriously phone-free. I knew she had hidden it in the vent once more. After quietly slipping into Rachel's room, I retrieved the phone, cloned it, and placed it back exactly where I found it. But I almost got caught. Emily came out of the shower, finding me sitting by Rachel's bed, stroking her hair. "Is everything okay?" she asked softly, her eyes full of suspicion. That I just shook my head and whispered, "Sometimes I like to sit with one of them, just to remind myself how lucky I am to have such beautiful children." She smiled, teasing me. "You're such a sentimental old man. Let's go before you wake her," she added, leading me out of the room. I followed, but my mind was somewhere else, back on that phone. The next day, I finally sat down to check the cloned phone, and that's when my entire world came crashing down. There were texts between Emily and some unnamed person, texts filled with intimate details of their secret meetings, the kind of details only someone who had been her lover for a long time would know. Things about Emily that I wasn't even part of anymore, as if I didn't exist in her life. Tears started rolling down my face as I sat in my office chair, the intercom buzzing in the background, completely ignored. Eventually, Laura, my secretary, knocked softly and came in. Laura always dressed conservatively and carried herself with an air of professionalism. Slim, with her red hair and sharp green eyes, she was older than her years, but we'd always had a strictly business relationship. I never gave her a reason to think otherwise. She had confided in me once about a former partner who had treated her poorly, and I'd stood by her side. That ended up costing me a partner, but it gave me 60% ownership of my firm. Laura saw my state and didn't ask questions right away. She left the room briefly to handle her previous task but returned with napkins, locked the door, and sat down beside me. "Tell me," she said gently. I handed her the phone, letting her see the messages. She read them, her expression calm but serious. "Do you know who it is?" she asked. I shook my head, feeling utterly defeated. "How do you know she's been cheating?" she pressed. I told her about finding the pill backing on the bathroom floor and discovering the hidden phone. The words just spilled out of me like I had no control over them. Laura listened quietly, and for the first time, she took my hand. That simple gesture felt more comforting than I expected. "You're going to need more information," she said calmly. "We'll have the DNA results by Wednesday. Can you hold on until then?" "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded and shifted gears, telling me that our team in Portland needed me urgently and booked a flight for me. "You'll be back on Thursday," she said, taking charge like she often did at work. "I can't focus on that right now," I mumbled, lost in the haze of everything that was unraveling in my life. "You tell Emily," she said, grabbing my phone to send a quick message to my wife. Emily replied quickly, saying she understood and loved me, like nothing was wrong. The ease with which she lied made my stomach turn. After handing my phone back, Laura pulled out her own and called someone. "Anna, it's Laura," she said, her tone all business. "Yes, thank you. When can we meet?" "This afternoon." "Perfect. See you then." Laura hung up and looked at me with a kind of authority I was thankful for at that moment. I wasn't thinking clearly, and it felt good to let someone else handle the details. When I came out of the bathroom a little later, Laura was holding my jacket. "Where are we going?" I asked, feeling dazed. "You've got an appointment with my friend," she replied simply. That I followed her to meet Anna, a divorce lawyer who had helped Laura through her own messy split. Her husband had been unfaithful with one of his employees, so she knew exactly what I was going through. Laura explained my situation to Anna while I sat there, barely able to process everything. This wasn't how my life was supposed to turn out. Anna wasted no time. She was a professional, focused on gathering all the facts. At one point, she called out my name, and I didn't respond. I was too lost in my own head. Then, out of nowhere, I felt a sting on my cheek. Laura had slapped me. The shock of it snapped me back to reality, and I saw Anna's raised eyebrow, half amused and half serious. "Thomas, do you have a plan?" Anna asked, her voice cutting through the fog in my mind. My brain clicked back into gear. "Take them both down," I said, expecting to see shock in the room. But instead, Laura grinned, and Anna simply raised an eyebrow. "Okay," Anna said, matter-of-factly. "I get it. But legally, that's not an option. Let's explore some realistic avenues." She laid out 3 options for me. The first was to do nothing, to play ignorant for the sake of a peaceful life. The second was an amicable divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, splitting assets and agreeing on child support. The third was going nuclear, suing for infidelity, contesting paternity, and everything that came with it. My thoughts raced, but I knew one thing for sure. Option 1 was out. I wasn't going to live as a complacent, betrayed man. Option 2 didn't sit right with me either. I'd invested too much into this life. "Nuclear," I said, my voice firm. Anna grinned. "All right then. I'll start drafting the paperwork. But you'll need to keep gathering evidence. We have to know who, when, and where. More proof will make the case stronger." She reached for the hidden phone and asked, "Can I keep this?" "It's not doing you any good right now." I nodded and handed it over. Laura and I left Anna's office, and she took me to a small, family-run hotel nearby, booking a room for me. "Go shower, and order something to eat," she instructed, her usual calm demeanor back in place as she took control of the situation. And for once, I didn't mind letting her. It was a relief to let someone else think for me, even if just for a little while. "I'll come back later with a few things for you." Laura left, and I moved mechanically, ordering room service as if I were on autopilot. My life was crumbling, and all I could do was numb myself with the mundane. 9 years of marriage, gone in the blink of an eye. What stung most was how blind I had been. How had I missed all the signs? Was it her boss? The one she always returned to after having each child? She'd claimed she valued her job, that her independence mattered to her, but maybe that was just an excuse to be close to him. I glanced at the minibar, tempted by the thought of drowning my sorrows. Laura must have sensed it because she walked in right at that moment. "Don't even think about it," she warned, her voice firm. "You need a clear head to plan." "Drinking will just make it worse." "Plan?" I asked bitterly. I had a plan. I had a loving wife, 2 beautiful kids, and now it's all falling apart. I'm a betrayed man who doesn't even know if his children are his. My life is in ruins, and you're asking me to plan? She studied me for a moment before glancing at her watch. All right, she said briskly, her tone shifting to business. Pity party's over. Remember all the challenges we faced when we started the company? Plans fell apart back then too. What does any of this have to do with numbers? I snapped. A lot, she countered. Remember when the patent office lost our application? Or when the bank tried to foreclose on us early because of external pressure? I started to respond, but she interrupted. When did you ever just sit down and give up? That was different, I muttered. Why? She pressed. What was different then? I had something to fight for, I said, the words slipping out without much thought. A family depending on me, and now? She asked, raising an eyebrow. You have an even bigger family. 141 people work for you, Thomas. They have families too. Do you really think any of your partners could keep the company going the way you do? If Emily takes half, she could sell it off to the highest bidder. Maybe Headingley swoops in and takes it all. Is that what you want? Her words hit me hard, and I felt the shift inside me. She was right. I couldn't let everything I'd built collapse. Even if my relationship with Emily was uncertain, my family's future, and the future of everyone depending on me, could still be secured. A newfound determination stirred within me, and I sat down with Laura. We started planning, focusing on the company and my children's welfare. The fog of confusion lifted, and for the first time in days, I felt a sense of purpose. Laura noticed the change and nodded approvingly. That's the Thomas the first need right now, she said, her tone supportive. Someone who looks ahead. We spent the rest of the evening strategizing ways to protect my assets and the company. I briefly considered selling my shares to the partners, but Laura quickly vetoed the idea, warning that they could mismanage or even dismantle the company. Instead, we decided on a more secure option, establishing an offshore trust. I'd sell the company at market value to the trust, retain my position as CEO on a nominal salary, and shield everything from local jurisdiction. On paper, I'd become a millionaire once the plan was executed. We also discussed liquidating my 401k and tapping into the home equity. The house was bought solely in my name since Emily wasn't working at the time. It needed to be reevaluated. We compiled a list of tasks, and I contacted my lawyer, David Thompson, to arrange a meeting the next day. By the time Laura left, I was exhausted. I fell into a deep sleep, waking only when I saw a message from Emily asking why I had left so suddenly. I responded that I'd be back Thursday, avoiding any mention of love or affection. Laura arrived early the next morning. After a quick shower, we had breakfast at a diner nearby. Despite the turmoil inside me, I focused on what needed to be done. Over breakfast, Laura told me that David was free at 10, but we should stop by the bank first to access my 401k and home equity before meeting him. I see the benefits of consolidating my finances, I said, stirring my coffee. But won't there still be a record of my assets? Can't the court order me to split them with her? Only if you still have the assets, Laura said with a grin. That's where Vegas comes in. Once you've gathered everything, spend a week in Vegas. Blow through it all before you file for divorce. When it goes to court, you'll look broke, deeply in debt, with a house on the verge of foreclosure, and barely enough income to cover your living expenses. She paused, then added, of course, if the kids are yours, you'll want to put your 401k in a trust for their education. That way, Emily won't be able to touch it. You might even get alimony from her. When will I know about the DNA results? She asked gently. I hesitated, picking up my phone. The testing company had sent me an email with a link to check the results, but I set the phone back down. I wasn't ready. Can I? Laura asked, holding out her hand for the phone. I handed it to her, watching her face carefully as she scrolled through. I searched for any sign, a clue, but her expression remained unreadable. They're not in yet, she said finally. It says they'll be available within the next 12 hours. I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of relief and dread. Let's go, Laura said, standing up. The bank should be open by now. Releasing equity from the house and cashing out my 401k went smoothly. I also closed all our savings accounts, including the children's college funds, transferring the money into a separate account under my name. I left the joint account untouched, though there was barely $10,000 left in it. When we briefed David on the plan later that morning, he raised a critical point. "You forgot something," he said. "What?" I asked, frowning. "You have a marriage contract," he reminded me. "I do?" I was genuinely surprised. I hadn't realized that had been part of the original partnership agreement when I started the company. All partners were required to sign a prenup, David explained. "It's meant to protect the company in the event of a divorce. It covers only the company's assets, not your personal ones," David clarified. "As an employee, all they can go after is your salary and 401k. "That's it," I nodded slowly, absorbing the information. "What I suggest," he continued, "without undermining your divorce lawyer's plan, is to take the equity you freed up from your house and invest it in the company. Buy out one of your partners, John, perhaps. He's always seemed keen to make a profit. You may need a loan from the company pension fund to cover the difference, but repayments would come from your reduced salary, minimizing the assets the court can assess. Since most of your finances would be tied to the company, they'd be protected. Yes, your credit might suffer from a foreclosure, and you'll lose half of what's left in your bank accounts, but beyond that, Emily won't get much. We can even adjust your salary so hers ends up higher, making her liable for child support." "How am I supposed to live?" I asked, frustration edging into my voice. "If my salary's tied up in loan repayments, how will I cover my living expenses? What about my 2 other children, and maybe more?" "Let's hold off on discussing the children for now," David advised. "Have you decided what you'll do if they aren't yours? Will you stay involved?" I hesitated. "I don't know," I admitted. "It's too much to think about right now. I need all the facts before making any decisions." "Remember the lawsuit your other lawyer mentioned?" David reminded me. "The one against her company? It could bring in enough to pay off the loan and restore your full salary when this is all over. Plus, if the kids aren't yours, you can claim expenses from their biological father, separate from the divorce settlement." I sighed, the weight of the decisions pressing down on me. "Could you reach out to John about selling?" "I don't think I can handle that right now," David nodded. "I'll handle it and update you as soon as I hear from him." We shook hands and left his office. For the first time in days, I felt a brief sense of relief. The pieces were starting to come together, and the plan felt solid. But then, the reality of why we were making these plans struck me again, and a hollow emptiness settled back in. Laura and I found a quiet diner for lunch, where I finally dared to check my phone. Clicking on the link in the email, I handed it to her, unable to bear reading the DNA results myself. I watched her face closely, hoping for a clue. "I'm so sorry, Thomas," Laura said softly, handing the phone back to me. I glanced down at the screen. Neither child was biologically mine. Both Sophie and Michael had the same father, someone else. The shock of losing both children hit me harder than I'd imagined. The betrayal was like a knife twisting in my gut. Not only had Emily lied to me about their paternity, but she had also convinced me to have a vasectomy, ensuring I could never have more children. "Thomas," Laura snapped, pulling me back to the present. "Now is not the time to lose it. Stay calm. We'll get through this." I tried to control the anger boiling inside me, taking deep breaths. But the rage was overpowering. I wanted revenge, wanted to hurt someone. For a moment, I even fantasized about hiring someone to deal with the man who had fathered the children I thought were mine. Sensing the dangerous direction my thoughts were taking, Laura composed herself and led me out of the diner. "Anna called," she said as we got into the car. "She wants to see you." We arrived at Anna's office, and she greeted us with a somber expression. "I have a preliminary report from the private investigator," Anna said, her voice careful. "Emily had a visitor last night. A man stayed at your house." I clenched my jaw, my stomach churning. I have cameras at home, I said. I'll swap the flash drives. We can review the footage. Good, she nodded. Do it now, and we'll strategize. This footage could be critical. The au pair is with Sophie and Michael at the play center, I added, my mind racing. I can't go back without raising suspicion. I'm supposed to be on a business trip. Anna checked her phone. The au pair is busy. I'll alert you if anything changes. We sped to the house, and I quickly swapped the flash drives. I did a quick sweep of the place. Everything seemed normal, but it still felt like a stranger's home. We rushed back to Anna's office and plugged in the new drive that I couldn't bear to watch the bedroom footage, but I had to know the truth. The video showed exactly what I feared: Bob Bennett, her boss, entering the house with his own key. What crushed me most was hearing Michael greet him as Papa Bob. Tears blurred my vision. I couldn't watch anymore. I broke down in front of them, something I hadn't done in years. For the first time, Laura wrapped her arms around me, holding me while I cried. After a few minutes, I pulled myself together. Anna watched me carefully. Would you like to rest for a while? She asked gently. That I shook my head. No. The pain's not going away, but the anger's building. What's our next move? Anna nodded, understanding my resolve. I've reviewed your wife's employment terms, she said. There's an anti-fraternization clause in her contract, and since Bob is a senior manager, we have grounds to sue her company for violating that policy. We briefed Anna on the advice David had given about investing everything in the company, prompting her to call him directly. He sent over copies of the prenuptial agreement, which Anna reviewed on the spot. This changes everything, Anna said, her eyes brightening as she scanned the documents. Your company lawyer's plan is perfect. If John agrees to sell, we can shield everything. And once we sue Emily's company, her and Bob will have solid leverage. It all depends on John, I said, feeling the weight of that uncertainty. We'll have to wait for his decision. Laura drove me back to the hotel, where I had been staying. Just as I reached my room, there was a knock on the door. It was Laura again. Let's go, she urged, her expression serious. You shouldn't stay here alone. Why not? I asked, genuinely confused. Because you'll either brood or hit the minibar, Laura replied firmly. I need to keep an eye on you. She was right. I knew I'd spiral if I stayed alone. Gathering my things, I followed her to the car. Where are we going? I asked, not really caring. To my place, she said matter-of-factly. I have a spare room. I opened my mouth to protest, but the look she gave me shut me up. I'd never been to Laura's house, and when we pulled up, I was surprised to see it was nearly as large as mine, though a single story. She showed me to the guest room, complete with its own bathroom. Take a shower and change, she instructed. Dinner's in 30 minutes. We ate in silence. The food was good, but I couldn't taste it. My mind was racing, emotions swirling, too chaotic to pin down. Anger. Betrayal. Sadness. But somehow, numbness took over. I was running on autopilot, laser-focused on executing the plans we'd made, anything to distract me from the pain. Just as I started to wonder what I'd do after dinner, my phone rang. I flinched, dreading it was Emily. It wasn't. John, I said, greeting him flatly. Why? He asked simply. John and I had been friends since university, back when we bonded over a project that eventually became the foundation of our business. I had invested more up front, which gave me the majority stake in the company. Emily's been cheating on me, I said bluntly. All this time? John asked, shocked. All this time, I confirmed. And neither of the kids are yours? There was a pause. So you want to tie everything to the company and rely on the prenup? He understood the partnership agreement better than I did. I'll keep 5% and stay on as a consulting engineer, he offered. I'll talk to HR about the details. The rest is yours. Okay, I agreed, feeling the weight lift slightly. I'll have David draft the paperwork. There was silence on the line for a moment before John spoke again. Thomas, I'm really sorry. I know it doesn't feel like it now, but it gets easier. I've been where you are, and it does get better. His words took me by surprise. I'd almost forgotten John had gone through a bitter divorce a few years back. He hadn't shared many details, but now I understood why he had distanced himself during that time. He had used the same marriage contract to protect his assets. The next morning, Laura woke me up with a cup of coffee in hand. "Let's go," she said. "We've got a lot to do." Our first stop was David Thompson's office. He'd already prepared the necessary documents for buying out John's shares. The transaction was surprisingly quick, taking less than 30 minutes. I liquidated everything: my home equity, savings, and 401k. I even secured a loan against the company pension plan to cover the rest. On paper, I was now nearly $1 million in debt, and my salary had been slashed by more than half. Next, we headed to Anna's office. She reviewed the documents for the buyout and nodded approvingly. "This is perfect," she said, satisfied. "I'll draft the papers, and we can file them on Monday." "Where do you want Emily to be served?" "Somewhere that will embarrass her the most," I replied, bitterness creeping into my voice. "If we could serve her on a Super Bowl billboard, I'd gladly pay for it," Anna chuckled softly. "We'll serve her at her office on Monday morning. 10 a.m. sharp, provided the court clears the papers by then. If I file today, we should have confirmation tomorrow afternoon." I nodded in agreement. "What's next?" Laura took over, her voice steady. "We have 2 more stops before you head back to work and pretend like you've just battled a fire in Portland. Can you hold out until Monday?" "I think I'll have to." "No need to guess," she assured me. "Tell me what you need to make it until then." "I'm not sure," I admitted. "How about some good news?" she asked, smiling mysteriously. "Let's go." Our next stop surprised me. We pulled up to the medical center where I'd had all my checkups, including the vasectomy that ensured I'd never father children again. "Why are we here?" I asked, confused. "Didn't you say you wanted good news?" she teased. "Come on, inside." Laura arranged for us to see my doctor quickly. I gestured for her to come into the consultation room with me, and she followed. Dr. Matthews greeted us without comment, familiar with Laura's role in my life. "Thomas," he began, "I understand you're inquiring about a vasectomy reversal." My eyes widened. "Is that even possible?" Dr. Matthews smiled. "Yes, it's quite possible. There's about a 95% success rate for reversals done within 10 years. It does involve a longer surgery under general anesthesia, but with your health, there's no reason you couldn't father children again." Tears welled up in my eyes. The possibility of having children again filled me with hope, a flicker of light in an otherwise dark time. "I know it's a lot to process," Dr. Matthews said gently, handing me information about the procedure and its costs, noting that it wasn't covered by insurance. "If you decide to move forward, we can schedule the necessary tests." "Thank you, doctor," Laura said, taking the paperwork from his hands. "We'll be in touch." As we left the clinic, Laura looked at me with a soft smile. "Is that good news enough for you?" I impulsively hugged her, overwhelmed with gratitude. "Thank you," I whispered into her hair before pulling back, embarrassed. "I'm sorry." "It's okay, Thomas," she reassured me, her tone gentled as we got back into her car. "One more stop," she said. Then back to the office. I had been to Bob Bennett's house a few times over the years, mostly for corporate events hosted by him and his wife, Olivia. They lived in a gated community just outside the city, a place I would soon be visiting under very different circumstances. When Laura and I arrived at Bob Bennett's house, Olivia was expecting us and welcomed us inside without hesitation. She led us to Bob's office and gestured for us to sit down. Without any small talk, she asked, "How can I help you?" I struggled to find my voice, the weight of what I was about to say heavy on my chest. "Did you know?" I asked finally. Olivia sighed, her expression somber. "No. I suspected, but I never had proof," she admitted. "I couldn't find anything solid to take to a lawyer. If I had, I would have taken him for everything he's worth." "Join the club," Laura muttered under her breath. Olivia turned back to me, her eyes searching. "Do you have evidence?" I nodded. "Proof that none of my children are mine," I said, my voice trailing off as emotion choked me. Olivia offered a sympathetic look, and for the first time, I felt a strange sense of camaraderie. She shared that she had long suspected something between Bob and Emily but had never been able to prove it. "What are you going to do now?" she asked, curious that I hesitated, unsure if I should share my full plan. There was always the risk that she might tip Bob off before Monday. But I decided I wanted Bob to be as blindsided as I was. "The real question is, what are you going to do?" I countered. Olivia's eyes flashed with understanding. She didn't press me and instead asked if I had a recommendation for a divorce lawyer. Laura pulled a card from her bag and handed it to her. "Thank you," Olivia said, pocketing it. "Will a week be enough?" I nodded. "That should be fine." With that, the meeting concluded. Olivia stood up, hugged me briefly, and kissed my cheek. "I'm so sorry," she repeated. Then, turning to Laura, she added, "Take care of him. He deserves better than what that woman did to him." Laura winced slightly at the affectionate gesture but said nothing. When we returned to the office, I spent the rest of the day catching up on tasks from my trip to Portland. By the end of the day, I was exhausted. Laura knocked on my door, peered in, and said she was heading out. Her tone was back to its usual professional cadence. The warmth I had felt from her earlier seemed to vanish, leaving me feeling adrift. Was I reading too much into things? I bid her good night, grateful for her help but unsure of where we stood now that I stayed late at the office, trying to drown out my thoughts with work. Around 8 p.m., Emily texted, asking when I'd be home. I replied that it might be another hour or two, explaining I had to finalize post-trip matters. She sent back a message that she'd probably be asleep by then, signing off with "love you" and kisses. I couldn't bring myself to respond and I finally left the office at 11 p.m., hoping to avoid any interaction with Emily. When I arrived home, the house was dark and quiet, everything seemingly normal. I checked on Rachel and Michael. They were fast asleep, peaceful and unaware of the storm brewing. I felt my heart break all over again and retreated to the bathroom to hide my tears. Despite everything, I still loved these children. How could I just walk away? But at the same time, they were constant reminders of Emily's betrayal. I resolved to wait and see how things would unfold. When I woke up the next morning, Emily was already gone. The housekeeper was tending to the children, and I wondered darkly if she knew they weren't mine. Had she been complicit in Emily's infidelity? My anger surged, and I briefly considered firing her. But I quickly reconsidered. Taking out my anger on the au pair wouldn't change anything. She had cared for our children since before Rachel was born. If she had known, she might have quit, or worse, risked her job by telling me. My rage might have been misplaced. When I arrived at work, Laura was already there, back to her usual efficiency. She had cleared my schedule for the day and brought me coffee, a small gesture but one that felt significant. "Marketing?" I asked, confused. "Why am I involved in that?" She grinned, which was oddly comforting. "It's the final part of Anna's plan." "What plan?" "We need to go public," Laura explained, her tone serious now. "Tell everyone, her friends, her family, her church groups, about who she really is and what she's done." "I'll look terrible," I protested. "Everyone will ridicule me for being a betrayed man raising another man's kids." "You need to tell your side of the story," she insisted. "If you don't, Emily will. And when she does, she'll make you look worse, abusive, unfit, anything to flip the narrative in her favor. People might doubt it, but if you speak out first, it will undermine whatever defense she tries to build." Reluctantly, I agreed. Laura had already prepared a media package containing all the evidence of Emily's infidelity. It included the private investigator's report, the DNA test proving the children weren't mine, and the surveillance footage from my house. The most damning clip was of Michael greeting Bob Bennett as Papa Bob. There were other videos too, ones I hadn't seen and didn't want to see. Later that morning, I received an email from Anna. It contained a bombshell. Olivia had provided Bob's DNA, and Anna had run it against the tests I'd already done. It confirmed what I had feared all along. Bob was the father of both Rachel and Michael, children, I thought, suddenly unable to think of them as mine. We incorporated this new information into the package prepared for Emily's and my parents, her siblings, and her wider contacts on Facebook and LinkedIn. Copies were scheduled for courier delivery on Monday at 10 a.m., perfectly timed with the planned legal service. All I had to do was get through the weekend. Drawing on my engineering background, I devised a small plan. In under an hour, I assembled a simple device with a motor, timer, and battery. I set it to vibrate after a certain amount of time. That Friday evening, after the au pair left, I discreetly placed it under Rachel's pillow, set to activate at 6 a.m., just when she usually woke up. I had one goal: to keep the children in our bed to avoid any possible intimacy with Emily. It worked perfectly. Early Saturday morning, Rachel wandered into our room, effectively blocking any closeness Emily might have tried. I smirked to myself. The rest of the day, I kept myself busy with long-neglected household chores. When Emily remarked on my sudden enthusiasm, I brushed it off, casually mentioning they needed doing. That night, when she tried to initiate something, I feigned sleep as soon as she came out of the bathroom. By Sunday morning, the device had worked once again, waking Rachel, who returned to Emily's room. We spent the day at the zoo with the kids. Every time I looked at Emily or the children, emotion surged through me. I almost broke down several times, but I forced myself to stay composed. I chewed the inside of my cheek until it bled, reminding myself that I had a plan. All I had to do was survive until Monday. Monday morning finally arrived, and I was resolute. I told Emily that I would work from home, citing a need to speak with the au pair about the kids. She barely acknowledged me as she left for work. At 8:15, the au pair knocked on my office door, suggesting we take the kids to the play center. I declined, insisting we keep them home for the day, which clearly surprised her. Michael protested but eventually accepted my decision. At 9 a.m., Laura arrived at the house, unexpected but welcome. I made coffee for her, a first. At 9:30, we joined Anna on a conference call to finalize everything. Thomas, Anna began, this is your last chance to stop this. I'm not saying you should, but if you've had a change of heart over the weekend, now's the time to speak up. No, I replied, my voice steady. Let's move forward, okay, then. I'll see you on the other side, Anna said. Everything was set in motion. I monitored my email, waiting for confirmation of service. At precisely 10 a.m., the first email came in. Then the second, followed by the third. Within minutes, my phone rang. I expected it to be Emily, but it was my mother, Thomas. She exclaimed, "Hi, Mom." I answered calmly. "What's going on?" she asked, concern dripping from her voice. "Did you read the package I sent?" I asked. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling. "I read it, then you know as much as I do. Emily has been cheating on me for years with her boss, Bob. The kids aren't mine. I'm divorcing her." "Thomas, you can't." "No, Mom, I have to. I need to work. I have other calls." I cut her off, my resolve unshaken. I ended the call almost immediately. My phone rang again. This time, it was Emily. I didn't answer, waiting for her voicemail. "Thomas, we need to talk," she said. "I'm coming home," and then she hung up. I turned to Laura. "Emily's on her way. I'll step out," Laura offered. I wanted to ask her to stay, but the words wouldn't come. I just looked at her. "Call me," she said softly as she walked to the door. "When you know what's happening," and with that, she left. 20 minutes later, Emily's car pulled into the driveway. She didn't bother using the garage. She came straight through the front door and into my office. She sat down across from me, her face pale and tense. "Thomas, not interested," I cut her off sharply. "Actually, uninteresting," I corrected, my voice cold. "I don't even want to hear whatever excuse you've prepared. Please, let me explain." "No," I interrupted again, my voice rising. "You lied to me for 9 years. Neither of those children are mine. You convinced me to get a vasectomy while you were still on birth control, just so you could keep sleeping with Bob. Emily's eyes widened in shock, as if she couldn't believe I knew that detail. So no, Emily, I continued. I don't care what you have to say. My lawyer's card is in the package you received this morning. If you have something important to say, talk to her. Her voice broke. What about the children? She asked. What children? I retorted coldly. I don't have children. If it were up to you, I never would have. I stared at her, my emotions swirling between fury and despair. I could ask why you did this to me, but I don't want to hear another lie. I'm done. I just want this to be over so I can salvage what's left of my life and move on. Just then, I called for the au pair, who had been nearby. She stepped into the room, confused. You're fired, I said flatly. Leave now. What? She exclaimed, clearly shocked. Why? Because you covered for her, I said, pointing at Emily. You knew she was having an affair with her boss. I don't know if you knew the kids weren't mine, but you definitely knew about the affair. I have video evidence of you discussing the children with Bob. Get out, Emily jumped in, her voice rising in anger. Thomas, you can't fire her. I pay her salary. Not anymore. You don't, I shot back. As of today, you'll be covering your own expenses. I'll see to that. The au pair cast a grateful glance at Emily, who was clearly her lifeline. Fine, I conceded, though my voice held no warmth. I've already notified the agency, informing them of your involvement in an extramarital affair. If Emily wants to keep you, she'll be responsible for your salary, taxes, vacation, pension, sick leave, and insurance. The au pair turned pale, realizing the consequences. Losing her job and being blacklisted by the agency meant her future in domestic work would be in jeopardy. Now get out, I repeated, more sternly this time. She hurried away, no longer looking at Emily for reassurance. Did you have to do that? Emily asked, her voice trembling. You started talking again, I shot back. I told you I don't want to hear it. What I want is for you to gather your things, take your kids, and leave my house. This is my home too, she insisted, her voice gaining strength. Not anymore, I interrupted. The house is registered solely in my name. Until the courts decide otherwise, I want you out. My voice had risen, and Emily flinched at my tone. That's when Michael entered the room, his small voice breaking the tension. Mommy, he said softly. Rachel fell. Emily, tears already streaming down her face, stood up to attend to Rachel. I closed my office door, sealing myself away from the chaos. It was too much to face all at once. From behind the door, I could hear Emily gathering her things and eventually leaving with the children. When she returned, she was holding Rachel. Are you going to say goodbye to Rachel? Emily asked, her voice almost pleading. Not like this, I responded coldly. She's not my daughter, and he's not my son. Take them to Bob, and let him take care of his children. They have nothing to do with me anymore, Thomas. She tried again. Get out, I cut her off. The front door closed a few minutes later, and her car started. She was gone. For the first time in what felt like ages, I exhaled. My whole body sagged under the weight of what had just happened. I collapsed into my chair, overwhelmed by everything I had lost. I didn't hear the door open or notice anyone come in until arms wrapped around me. Startled, I looked up to find Laura holding me. I buried my head in my hands, and she pulled me closer, offering the comfort I didn't know I needed. I broke down in her embrace, sobbing like I hadn't allowed myself to in years. It took a long time to regain control, but eventually, I pulled back, feeling utterly drained. I've thrown away 9 years, I muttered, more to myself than anyone else. My marriage, my kids, my entire life. All gone. Laura, ever practical, took charge. Let's go, she said firmly. Anna mentioned that Emily might be back in a few hours with an emergency order to take back the house. We don't want her throwing you out of your own home. We hurriedly gathered some clothes and important documents. I wasn't sure where I'd go, but we loaded our cars with my belongings and left. First, we stopped at the office, where I had been served the divorce papers. Later, Anna called to update me on the legal proceedings. There was bad news. Not only had Emily obtained a temporary occupancy order for the house, but I was also slapped with a restraining order, keeping me 100 meters away from the property. If I needed anything, I'd have to schedule it through her lawyer. At my expense, disoriented by the events, I found myself settling into Laura's spare room. My clothes hung in her closet, my documents neatly organized in her office cabinets. A week passed like this, working during the day, returning to Laura's house at night for meals and sleep. She remained professional, though I couldn't ignore the subtle shift in our relationship. Our interactions were the same, yet there was an unspoken tension between us. Monday came, and we had a meeting with the lawyers from Emily and Bob's company. Details flew over my head, but Anna seemed pleased. The deal included Bob's dismissal, the forfeiture of his pension, and a settlement for Emily that would cost the company $1.5 million. I was set to receive $750,000 after finalizing the divorce, which would help repay my debts to the company pension fund. At I end the meeting with Bob's lawyers later that day, I left $500,000 richer. It wasn't enough to fix everything, but it was a start. Anna was a force of nature. She handled everything with precision, making sure I walked out of that office in a much better position than when I had entered. The last meeting of the day was with Emily's divorce lawyers. Emily was present, but she wouldn't look at me. Anna, ever sharp, brought up the prenuptial agreement and the falsified paternity of the children. After some back and forth, Emily's lawyer finally relented. "Thomas, please," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. 9 years, 9 damn years, I responded. Day after day, you lied to me. There's nothing left to say. Emily nodded, defeated, and signed the papers. I wasn't there when she moved out of our house. I received a letter from her lawyer, confirming the house transfer and the lifting of the restraining order. But I had already decided to sell the house. It was no longer a home to me. 2 months later, I was still living in Laura's spare room. Emily had moved back in with her parents. Her family refused to communicate with me, and I wasn't surprised. Despite Olivia's promises, she never divorced Bob. He had lost his job and pension, and they downsized into a modest apartment. I didn't care to know if Emily and Olivia had ever crossed paths again. One afternoon, I was at my desk when Laura walked in without knocking. "Bob Bennett is dead," she said bluntly. "What?" I asked, stunned. "How?" "Olivia caught him with Emily again," Laura explained. "She shot him." I leaned back, processing the news. A grin spread across my face, despite my attempts to suppress it. "That couldn't have happened to a nicer guy," I said, unable to hide my satisfaction. Laura chuckled. "Are you mad at me for feeling good about this?" I asked. "Not at all," she replied. "He got what he deserved." "Oh, by the way," she placed an official envelope on my desk. We both knew what it contained. I opened it. "That's it," I said quietly. "I'm finally a free man." "Finally," Laura echoed softly. Unexpectedly, she leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a fleeting kiss, but a deep, passionate one that left me breathless. When she pulled back, she looked into my eyes and said, "For 9 years, I've stood by you. You're the most honorable man I've ever known. You never once made a move on me, even when you had every chance. I've been waiting for this moment, Thomas. I want to show you that not all women are deceitful. I know you as well as any wife knows her husband, and you know me too. Please give me a chance." I was speechless, overwhelmed by memories of our time together. I realized that I had feelings for Laura, feelings that had developed over years of working closely together, even while I was married to Emily. There was no need to question them. They had always been there. "Do you have anything to say?" she asked, concern flickering in her eyes. "How many?" I asked. She looked puzzled. "How many what?" "Children," I clarified. "How many children should we have?" A smile spread across Laura's face, and I knew then that my life was about to begin again.